I'm Hridyesh. I work at OutSystems as a technical knowledge specialist, and I have been working with AsyncAPI for the last 6 months under the GSOL program, and I'll be more than happy to help you understand how to generate docs using AsyncAPI. Before we move ahead, right, we dive deep into AsyncAPI docs generation. Is everyone familiar with AsyncAPI and what it does at a superficial level? We can cover it, but is everyone clear, right? Okay. Regardless, I'll just show you a definition. So this is what the definition is, but let's talk about an example, right? So I'm always up for pizza, right? Because it's almost lunchtime and I'm for pizza. So let's say you're trying to make an API, asynchronous pizza API, and you're trying to define the API, you're trying to understand what all events would be there, how would you process those events, and so on and so forth, right? So now when you're talking about specifically pizza, right, what do you think the events would be? It would be orders submitted via an online app, I'm assuming. Then there would be an event to let the kitchen know that there's an order. Then there would be an event to let the delivery person know that the order is ready and deliver it to the specific person, right? So now just for one single event, there are 3 event handlers. And for 3 event handlers, you need documentation. And generating documentation can be sometimes a little bit tricky. So that is where AsyncAPI can help you. And let's dive deep into it, right? So the way you generate AsyncAPI the way you generate documentation using AsyncAPI is using specifications, right? And now specification help you convert an YAML file into Markdown or an HTML template or documentation. Now these are some of the components: servers, channels, components, operations. V3 means it's available in AsyncAPI version 3. So be sure to notice there are some differences between 2.6 and 3.0. So then there are messages, info. So we'll dive deeper into this in the demo, but these are just some of the components, right? Okay, so things to consider while working with the specification, right? In the YAML file, all the things are case sensitive. So if you run into an issue, try to check about the case sensitivity. Again, we use JSON, but it does not have to be completely JSON. You can use different formats, and it will adapt to it. And if you're using YAML, then try to use YAML version 1.2 with some considerations that you can find on our website or the documentation for AsyncAPI. Okay, so now the crucial part of this, right? How do we generate docs? And it's initially a 3-step process. You install the CLI, you write the specification file, and you generate documentation using the generator. This feels very simple, right? But let us dive deep into an example. Talk is cheap, show me the code, or in this case, specification. Again, I'm hungry, so I'll again take the example of the pizza shop. But you folks can think of another examples, and please feel free to consider other examples. Okay, so let us create a new file, YAML file. Let us say new asyncAPI.yaml, right? So now there are some of the issues while working with the CLI. There is also a tool called AsyncAPI Playground. So if you folks want to follow along, this is a great tool to follow along without installing the generator or the CLI. It can help you accommodate the changes. Now let's get back into the example. So first of all, you're going to define your AsyncAPI version. Now there are going to be some errors, and I'm going to show you the beauty of open source, that these are already in PRs, and these are waiting to be merged. So let's say I define 3.0, and you go into info, you dive deep into the title, pizza API. I mean, again, you could go for better examples, just I'm hungry, that's all. You go for version. Oh, you could maybe add a description of what this is about. Right? So what info does is, right, it gives you more information on metadata, essentially about what the specification file is going to do you, or what the API is going to do for you, right? That is what info does. After the info is done, let's dive deep down into servers. So, all right. So servers help you define where the endpoint is, right? Either it could be a Kafka broker, or it could be a MQTT broker, or there are different options for it, and you can definitely play around with it. One thing to note is async API is uh, protocol agnostic. That means different servers have different communications, right? You cannot expect the way Kafka behaves or the terminology in Kafka to be same in RabbitMQ, right? So just keep that in mind when you're generating documentation or generating the code. So URL, you could just maybe do pizza.com, protocol, call would be Kafka. So now all this is happening, right? You have defined the servers, you have defined the protocol, and now you know what is going to happen. So for you can have different servers. You can have it for development, production, staging. There are different examples for it. But now when we are done with servers, I'll go into channels, and then you're going to define the channels. And I'm taking the example of Kafka, so you define channels, and you define the operations in the channels. So if now we dive deep here, we're going to see orders, submit, publish, message, then we have a ref, and now we can fill this left later. So there are two channels. One is for submitting the order. The second one is for letting the kitchen know that the order has been accepted. Okay, and then we do a subscribe, and then a message. And then obviously we have the reference to the message. So this is what the main gist of the component is going to be, or specification. You have channels, you have either you want to publish to them or subscribe to them, then you have the message. Now, once we have this skeleton of the document ready, you can fill in additional details, such as tags or references. And this is initially what's going to do it, right? So this is a more filled out template. But now that we have the specification ready, right? Let me show you what I'm talking about. So let's say it's 3.0. And I'll show you some of the errors we have right now. And then I'll tell you how to not do those errors. So we have open terminal. Okay. I use Conda environments just to keep my net clean, but you can do whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay. So let's try HTML template, version 3.0, and everything looks good, right? Everything looks good. So we are going to just generate them. Okay. So while this is generating, you cannot generate AsyncAPI documentation for version 3 right now, okay? Because there's an open PR and it's going to be reviewed. But you can do this in the AsyncAPI Studio. I just want to let you know that you cannot do this, and you will run into errors. You'll try to figure out what's wrong. Maybe I did something wrong, but it's not you. It's the PR. So you cannot use 3.0.0, right? So to counter it, you're going to use 2.6. Okay. So now we have that in order. Now, when we are talking about templates, right, you can generate HTML documentation or Markdown. Markdown is most generally used by technical companies. I myself work with Markdown. But there's another error. Okay, there's an error due to the previous command. But if you generate Markdown template, right, again, the Markdown template is not supported right now. There's an error with the JavaScript function, so you cannot generate Markdown documentation. But all that, okay, I'll try to fix this. So you see the HTML files are generated, right, in my docs HTML folder. So you have all your documentation there. Again, you cannot do Markdown right now with Spec 2.6 or 3.0. There's an open PR. That's work in progress. You cannot use AsyncAPI 3.0 to convert documentation, right? And another thing, if you are working with 2.60 or a version below, there's a really neat feature which allows you to convert it into 3.0, which is your AsyncAPI Studio. So it's going to understand that it's invalid, right? And not the latest version. So you see it's not the latest version, but I can convert it into the latest version. So this is what your documentation is going to look like in HTML, even if you open the file, which is this file. So you see, this is pretty good documentation. So you're good to go. You can tweak certain changes. You can make new modifications. But you pretty much have a great documentation, like an initial starter guide. So there are some other AsyncAPI tools as well. So AsyncAPI Studio helps you design a blueprint for your asynchronous APIs, create documentation, create code. CLI helps you run those commands to actually generate the code. And then generator is helping you build the initial structure. And with that, I think I covered that up quite fast, but I'm happy that we were running short on time. So that is how you generate documentation using AsyncAPI specifications. And things to remember, no Markdown template supported yet, and no HTML template for 3.0 for CLI. And that's all from my side. These are my social handles, and I'll be somewhere in the office. Please feel free to reach out to me, talk to me about AsyncAPI, event-driven architecture, or open source in general, or Google Seasons of Docs. But I'll be around. Thank you.